Okay.
Okay, today we will have Mr. Don Cravens Jr. He serves as the National Urban League Senior Vice President for Policy and the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau. Since 1998, Cravens has been a practicing attorney and a member of the Louisiana Bar Association. In 2004, he was elected to the Louisiana House of Representatives. In 2006, Craven was elected to the Louisiana Senate. In January of 2009, Cravens left the Louisiana legislature to serve as the staff director and chief counsel for the United States Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. In January of 2013, Cravens began serving as Chief of Staff for U.S. Senator Mary Ann Landrieu of Louisiana. In addition to his duties at the National Urban League, Cravens is an adjunct professor at George Washington University and serves as a captain in the D.C. Army National Guard Judge Advocate General Corps. He is married to Yvette Cravens and they have 3 children. Yvette served as Chief of Staff for Congressman William Lacy Clay Jr. of Missouri. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Next we will have Ms. Nancy Flake Johnson, who is the President and CEO of the Urban League.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Our lunch is just about ready for service. It's going to be very informal, but we want to be respectful of your time. So we're here because Urban League wants to partner with our legislature to advance the economic mobility of Georgia families. We've got some circumstances that are driving our work. Number one, we're number 1 for business. Great news, right? We're number 1 for business out of all the states in the nation. That means jobs, economic opportunity, etc. But here's the challenge. We're practically number 1 for poverty. We're number 3 in the nation. And this metro area has just been designated as one of the most challenging communities in the country to move out of poverty into the middle class. We believe working together, we can change those circumstances. And that's why a partnership between the Urban League and our state legislature means so much to us. There's a couple other key things I want you to know. What is the minimum wage in Georgia? Who knows what it is? It's $5.15. No wonder we're ranking 3rd in poverty. But what is the livable wage in this metropolitan area? What do you think per hour?
26.
$26.55, that's $27 all day long for a single parent of 2 kids. What we've seen is there's a misalignment of the skills of Georgia residents with the opportunities that being number 1 for business brings about. And so it's causing poverty, low educational attainment is a contributing factor, and we need to train our people and do a better job of leveraging the state's resources to ensure that we grow our economy. So you're going to hear about opportunities for us to work together. You're going to hear about the state of Black America and the state of Black Georgia. So, and before I bring on our keynote speaker, I do want to recognize 2 people. The co-chair of the Urban League of Greater Atlanta's board, Legislative and Policy Committee, Kevin Johnson. Stand up, Kevin. And I also want to recognize the chair of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Senator Jackson, just walked in the room. Thank you for being here. So without further ado, I'm going to bring you Donald Cravens Jr.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon.
It is so good to be here, members. It is a pleasure. I apologize, I'm going to stand with my back to you so I can see these lovely people and see the screen, but it is an honor to be with you today. Ms. Johnson and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta, it is a pleasure to be with you. Nancy Johnson is the benchmark of the Urban League movement. We've got 90 affiliates in 36 states, including the District of Columbia, and Nancy Johnson and her team, and on that team I'm talking about all of them, but I can't forget about Ms. Dottie Johnson, who reminded me she's been here for 41 years. And since you've got another 41 in her, Nancy. But they are the benchmark of the movement. A movement, the Urban League movement, when I joined the Urban League 3 years ago, I wondered, what did that mean, the movement? And I get it now. It means that we can't be stationary, right? We're constantly moving forward. Some people don't move as quick as others in the movement. Nancy Flake Johnson is the pace setter. And the Urban League of Greater Atlanta is the pace setter. And so I'm so proud to be here. She asked me to come. I could not say no, and I would not have said no. She told you what I'm going to talk about today. And so I'm going to get started. Members, it's an honor to be here with you. As the vice chair mentioned, I served in the Louisiana legislature, both in the House and in the Senate. I was honored to serve with my father, who was in the Senate when I was in the House. And we got a lot of stares when we were both in both houses at the same time. I saw some of those stares today when I walked into the Georgia State Capitol. Some of those stares that wonder, what are we doing here? And so it is so good to be with you. I appreciate your service. I know in those last couple of days of session, as we were talking about, that's when the crazy stuff, if you're not watching it, gets passed. And I know you're here protecting all of Georgians, but especially the underserved ones. And so thank you for your service, and I appreciate you. So let's get started. Who am I? We talked about the Washington Bureau. I work at the Urban League, the National Urban League's Washington satellite office. We have a Washington, D.C. Urban League. That is not where I work. And they've got a great CEO and a great staff. I am Mark Morial's Senior Vice President for Policy, basically. And so what I do is when Whitney Young in 1962 was working with Dr. King and others to get the Voting Rights Act passed, he said the Urban League has to have a steady presence in Washington. And since that time, Ron Brown, who was Secretary of Commerce, was my predecessor, was one of my predecessors. We have been there. We bought our building recently this year. We're in the same building with the United Negro College Fund on Howard's campus. And so every day we get a chance to be reminded why we are working. February is the shortest month, and I know we celebrated Black History, but I want to talk a little Black history before I start. I'm a big student of Reconstruction era history, because it was the first time that African Americans in this country got a chance to serve in legislatures, become sheriffs, superintendents, and yet we don't talk about that history as if something was wrong with that history. And those of us who grew up in the South, like I did in Louisiana, Reconstruction was one chapter of your Louisiana history book. And they talk about the carpetbaggers and the scallywags and all these terrible people who came down from up north to take over our great state and destroy it, and then we took it back. What they don't say is that there were many men of color who represented people of color in the whole state in the legislature. So of course you must know who Jefferson Franklin Long is, right? No. Jefferson Franklin Long was the second African American elected to the United States House of Representatives. He was from the great state of Georgia. And he was the first African American to ever deliver a speech on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. And so, brothers and sisters, we've got history right here that your predecessors, those people existed. And yet we are fighting for monuments that came after these people served. And so we have a responsibility, all of us, to make sure that this history is not forgotten. Another bit of history you may or might not know. Who knows who Robert Smalls is?
South Carolina Congress.
South Carolina. Robert Smalls was born a slave. We believe that his father was his slave master. Early on in the Civil War, the Confederates got him and 7 other slaves to steer a boat. The boat was called the Planter. This is what the Planter looked like. The Confederates thought Robert was a great guy, and the slaves who were with him were great guys. They trusted Robert.
Yeah.
They didn't trust him, right? They didn't know that Robert and the other slaves were planning a coup.
Yes, right.
That they were going to steal the Planter.
Yeah.
They were going to get their families, and they were going to go up north. And so one night at 3 a.m., Robert did just that. Now, there was 8 slaves on the boat. One they couldn't trust. There's always one. So they took 7. Sometimes 2. They took 7. And they stopped. They picked up their wives and their children. They went to the north. Well, with Robert's journey, what it did was it convinced Lincoln that African Americans could join the Union, and could serve in it. And so Robert worked with the Navy. They wouldn't let him be a commander because he had not gone to Annapolis, but he ended up serving in the U.S. Army. was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives, served in the South Carolina State Senate, served in the United States Congress. This is what he looked like when he was in Congress. That was the transformation. Now, why Robert Smalls is important and why should you care? Well, that's good for South Carolina. Why does it matter here in Georgia? Because Robert Smalls also, I want to say one other thing, served in the military afterwards, served in the National Guard of South Carolina. His great-great-granddaughter lives here in Atlanta. She is a U.S. attorney. I'm proud of the fact that I work with her. She's also a full bird colonel. I have to say that because not many women are full bird colonel. In the reserve, she serves as my commander of the D.C. Army National Guard in the JAG Corps. She's a assistant U.S. attorney here in Atlanta, and she's here. Melanie Williams is here. Of the history that, and you can see how legacies continue. We all ran out and paid money to see a movie recently about a fictional character in a fictional place, and it gave a lot of African Americans pride and joy, and that was a good thing. But there are some real life stories of African Americans that we don't know anything about, that we don't talk about, that should give you enough pride and joy, should give all of you enough of why you do what you do, that you don't need Hollywood to tell you anything. And so it's important that we continue to remember that Reconstruction history, because that is the foundation of us. Those of us who have served in the legislature, these are the men and women who fought hard to have that opportunity. So that's my little speech for the day. Let's talk about Whitney M. Young. Not my grandfather, he's a good looking man. And people say, you look like Whitney a little bit. I like that. We share a birthday. Whitney Young was the transformative figure in the Urban League movement. We were founded in 1910, and when Whitney Young took over in the 1960s, he ushered in the modern-day Urban League movement. And when Mr. Young came about what he said to America was, citizens everywhere must realize the effects of 300 years of oppression cannot be obliterated by doing business as usual. So when we were freed from slavery and just said, okay, you're free, and nothing was ever done to invest in our communities, people couldn't then say, pull yourselves up out by the bootstraps, because as Mr. Young said, we never had boots and we never had straps. And so Mr. Young, in 1962, did an op-ed to the New York Times. And in that op-ed, he said, today the average Negro family earns $3,233 as compared with $5,835 for a white family, a difference of 45%. Meaning, a black family in 1962, we had about 55 cents on the dollar of a white family. He also said that the unemployment rates for Negroes were from 2.5 to 3 times higher than that of our white workers. So what Mr. Young called for was a Marshall Plan. Now, for those of you who studied World War II history, you know that after World War II, the Allies, America and our allies, we invested $17 billion in Europe to rebuild Europe, to make sure that it got back up on its feet. Mr. Young said we should do the same thing for America, that we should actually spend some tax dollars in America. And we should invest in our urban communities, or in our suburban communities, those areas that needed infrastructure and needed some support. And so he called for a domestic Marshall Plan. And he talked about the same things that the Urban League has always talked about, but he tried to sell this plan to President Nixon. We needed to focus on education, on employment, on housing, on health and welfare. The same things Ms. Johnson talked about what the Greater Atlanta Urban League focuses on. Mr. Young passes away unexpectedly. He's in Africa, swimming, heart attack. He's flown back, and his Marshall Plan never really sees the we're in Vietnam at the time. President Nixon, who had actually come very close, gave the eulogy at Mr. Young's funeral. Mr. Nixon, we're in Vietnam, the money is going towards the war effort, the domestic Marshall Plan never comes in. But what the Urban League learned from that was we needed to start cataloging those things Mr. Young talked about. So we started the State of Black America Report, which we've been doing for 41 years. This year will be the 42nd year of the State of Black America Report. And what do we track in the State of Black America Report? The same things that Mr. Young asked us to track. The unemployment index, the income index for African Americans, Latino Americans, and white Americans. And so what I want to talk to you today about is unemployment. When you look at a city like Baltimore, now this is 2017 numbers, but the numbers, the differentials have not changed, unfortunately. The black unemployment rate in Baltimore is 9.5%. The white unemployment rate is 4.3%. Chicago. We read these stories every weekend about Chicago, the gun violence in Chicago, why things are happening in Chicago. It's not a surprise to me or anyone who knows the statistics. the black unemployment rate is 16.2% in Chicago compared to the 4.7% unemployment rate of white Americans in Chicago. Here in this region, in 2017, in the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Roswell area, black unemployment rate was 10.1% compared to the white unemployment rate of 4.8%. Ms. Johnson said, even when white unemployment is low, the black unemployment rate is still 2.5 to 3 times that of white America. Now, the President of the United States at his State of the Union address bragged about the black unemployment rate being the lowest that it had ever been in the month of December. And I want to address that because that's a statement that has to be addressed. That was true for the month of December. But the problem with taking a snapshot of 1 month's unemployment rate and not comparing it to a year or not comparing it to a cycle is dangerous. Because what we saw in January of 2018, the black unemployment rate shot back up to 7.7%, which when you looked at the white employment rate, raised the black-white unemployment rate again to 2.2%, restoring that 2-to-1 persistent gap that Mr. Young talked about in 1963. Remember? Income. Washington, D.C., my home now. White income is $112,000, the black income is $68,000. You can look at every city in America other than Atlanta, and not that it's much better, but it's a little better. If a white family makes $100,000, a black family makes $50 or $60. Baltimore, 85 and 50. Chicago, 76 and 34. Atlanta, 72 and 45. The state of Georgia, 57 and 36. So when you think about the fact that a black family has to go to the same grocery store, to the same gas station with 60 cents on a dollar, or 40 cents less than their white colleagues, you understand why the job that you're doing here in the legislature is very important. So what is our solution? So the Urban League in 2017 re-released our State of Black America report, but our Main Street Marshall Plan. It's called Moving from Poverty to Prosperity. And in that plan, we're talking about many of the same issues, just with an updated fashion. Jobs in the economy, education and children, housing ownership and asset building, health, justice, voting, and civic education. And I want to talk about those things briefly today. If you notice Ms. Blake Johnson's staff and her mission, it's the same issues. It's employment, it's careers and entrepreneurship, it's housing and community development, it's financial literacy and wealth creation, youth empowerment, and civic engagement, health and leadership. So jobs in the economy. We at the national level, we are fighting for a minimum wage of $15 indexed to inflation. We want to see access to capital increase for small and minority business owners. Brothers and sisters, all of you in this room, the best way, there are 2 ways we cure persistent unemployment in the African American community. Through job training and apprenticeships, and I'll talk about that. But in my opinion, as a small business person, as someone who worked on Capitol Hill in small business, minority small businesses are the best way to decrease unemployment. Why? Because when that black woman opens that small business, she's probably going to hire someone who she knows from church. She's probably going to hire someone she knows from the local community. She may give a second or even a third chance to a young brother who needs it. Because I know your mama and them, right? And so the way we're going to cure persistent unemployment is through job training and some of the things that they're doing in the Urban League here, but it's going to be through the creation of black business and the support of black business. Atlanta, you are the benchmark. When black people are asked, where do you think they'd be the most successful black businesses, we would say Atlanta. And you do have successful black businesses. However, 90% of your businesses don't have an employee. They're self-employed people. And if you look at this statistic, the business value by race, and it's hard to see, an Asian business is $700,000 worth value. A white business has a $600,000 value. This is the average. A black average is $58,000. So it's hard to hire employees and grow when your business's value, typically for people of our race, is $60,000 compared to our white brothers and sisters down the street, who their typical value may be $700,000. So we've got work to do. Ms. Johnson here, in her platform, she's got the same thing in her legislative priorities. Increasing the minimum wage, she talked about that in her speech. $5.15 is ridiculous, right? Nobody can feed a family on $5.15. Support working families with a state work credit on earned income tax, Senate Bill 172 and House Bill 329. Increase access to capital and contracting for small and minority and women-owned businesses, House Bill 21. These are real, now I know, because I've been in your shoes before, it's hard arguing some of these points to our colleagues. They don't get it. They don't want to get it, right? But you can't stop arguing. We can't stop the argument because this is legit. These numbers are real. This is for American businesses. We have a responsibility to continue to fight the good fight with these people, whether they want to get it or not. We can't give up on the message. Education in children, the National Urban League supports taking care of our children really from the cradle to the grave. People always learn. We want to invest in our public education. HBCUs, we are very much on the protection of our HBCUs, especially during this administration in Washington.
Yes,
and so we are working very, very hard in the education and children's space. As you know, education in Georgia, when you look at this is a statistic that I found that resonates with me. It's the same thing in my home state of Louisiana. Still, our children are lacking and lagging behind when you look at high school students who are graduating on time compared to their white brothers and sisters who are doing much better. So we've got work to do in education. Housing and ownership and asset building during the Great Recession that we were able to come out of after 07, I will tell you, most African Americans lost their wealth, and they lost it because they lost their homes. Our wealth for the African American community has traditionally been in our homes. And so the housing market hurt everyone, but it had a disproportionate effect on African Americans. And so Nancy and all of our Urban League affiliates have strong housing counseling programs, and that is why. It is still the American dream to own a house. It is still the way we get the most wealth as African Americans. And so we have a lot of focus on protecting those programs that help people on the pathway to home ownership. Health. We fought very hard in Washington, somewhat to no avail, to protect the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And why did we do it? Was it perfect? No. Was it the best, only way to do health care? It was not. But I was there on Capitol Hill when we passed it. We couldn't get one single Republican to fight any piece, to support any part of the bill. So what passed is what passed. Even I think President Obama will tell you it wasn't perfect. But if there's one place that African Americans saw positive movement, it was in healthcare when 12 million African Americans received health insurance for the first time. And so it was sad, it saddens us in the Urban League to see people losing their health care, because if you look at the health in Georgia, women of color are less likely to be insured than white women. If you look at African American women, Georgia is one of 5 states where women are least likely to have, all women, least likely to have health insurance. Even lower than the Southern average. And I know this is hard to see, but trust me, that's what it says. And so healthcare is still a big issue to us. Health insurance, availability, access are big issues to us and part of our Main Street Marshall Plan. And then finally, justice, voting, and civic engagement. Like you, we are very concerned with criminal justice reform. It seems to be one of the few places where there's some bipartisan movement. I think even some of my former Republican colleagues in Louisiana who would not have been part of a criminal justice reform bill, they have started moving those bills because they realize that it saves some money. So whether they do it in representative for the right reason or for the fiscal reason, it doesn't matter. We need criminal justice reform, and we need it now. We have to get these young men and young women out of the facility, the correctional facility, if they've not committed crimes that warrant them staying in for much longer, and give them a job, a trade. We just can't give up on an entire generation of people. Voting rights. No one talks about the fact that in 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States declared major portions of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional. This last presidential election was the first one in 50 years where there was no protections of the voting right. This next congressional election that's coming up in 2018, later this fall, the voting rights are still declared unconstitutional. It's almost, what saddens me the most is even the civil rights community doesn't talk about it anymore. The Democrats don't talk about it on the Hill. The Republicans don't talk about it on the Hill. Every time the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized by Congress, Bush did it, Reagan did it, and now we can't get them to even talk about it. We can't get a hearing in the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives on the bill. It should be enough to have shut things down, because we've been trying to shut some government down lately. What about voting rights, though? And so you got to ask those questions, and we need you to help us prod and push, because we need a voting rights. And if you the Voting Rights Act, and if you haven't seen the types of voter suppression that we've been seeing in Texas and Mississippi and North Carolina and the northern states too, it's because those protections are there, and now you have to go to court because the Justice Department doesn't have pre-clearance. Here in Georgia, House Bill 660 and House Bill 663, hate crimes bill, I know the Urban League here, that's part of their legislative issues, and the funding the criminal justice reform bill, which is Senate Bill 174. Dr. King said, the ultimate measure of a man or a woman is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. And brothers and sisters, if there's ever been a time of challenge and controversy, it is now. But the good news is we got you. And we've got these people. And we know where we stand. We know where we stand. And we've got a lot of work to do. I would just simply say the Urban League, the National Urban League, the Urban League of Greater Atlanta, we want to support all of you, our senators and representatives, both from the city as well as from outside of Atlanta. We are here as your partners to be here. The last thing I want to talk about is infrastructure. The president has laid out an infrastructure plan. The plan changes the way things have been traditionally funded, right? He wants to do a 20-80 split, where the federal government puts up 20%, and you guys are going to find 80% of any infrastructure project. I know you got plenty of money, so you can easily do that, right? So that probably won't pass the Congress, but he has laid out an infrastructure plan. The Democratic Party has laid out its infrastructure plan as well. Where should people of color be on all of this infrastructure? Where the Urban League is we have certain core principles. We believe that any infrastructure bill, whether it's a local bill here in Georgia or a national bill, there's just certain things an infrastructure bill should have. One, infrastructure needs to be broadly defined. Infrastructure is not just a road or bridge. It's a school, it's a library, it's a park. It's those things that help children from that cradle to the grave, the quality of life. It's energy efficient housing, it's broadband, to make sure that all children, even in rural children as well as urban children, have access. It's a commitment to fund job training. Miss Nancy Flake Johnson and her team, they have a great example of how you can help men being released from prison, and women, help them gain a skill, put them in a job, so that when they get out, they've actually got a shot to make it, right? That's what infrastructure is. There has to be a commitment to that. It's empowering minority contractors. It's having goals and having metrics to measure those goals. It is promoting inclusiveness. It should not exclude individuals from participation on the basis of demographics and geography or financial gain means. We want to build for resilience. We know something's going on with our weather. So one of the things we can do with this new infrastructure is build for the future. We want a multimodal transportation planning. Things have changed. Everybody doesn't drive the way we used to drive. Our infrastructure principles need to include those things. And then we want to future-proof. We want to make sure that whatever we do in this country, whatever this billion-dollar infrastructure investment will be, it plans for the future of young people. So if it's 5G or it's wired speeds that are faster to make sure that everyone has access, that's what we're hoping for. It's the same things that Whitney Young asked for even back in the 1960s. So we have a call to action. We are asking legislators across the country to consider authoring a model resolution that basically calls for the principles I just enumerated. So we made it a resolution with the hope that maybe a resolution can pass. But all the resolution does is urges and requests Congress, that's the first call to action I'm asking for, urge and request Congress that if they pass an infrastructure bill, that the principles I just enumerated, inclusiveness, minority vendor participation, a broad definition of infrastructure, we would like for you, the caucus, to consider authoring this resolution. It's a model piece, so I've got the draft language, so it makes it easy on your ledge council. And we would ask that you try to get something like this done, and it would urge and request, again, Congress, that if they're going to do anything in infrastructure, they need to have. The CBC is doing a similar federal resolution, but we want to see that our states, as Ms. Johnson said, we must work together to make sure that our message is getting out. You may want to consider that if any infrastructure projects are done here in Georgia, that many of these same principles be part of that as well, whether that's by resolution or just by the work that you do. In closing, again, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be here. The Urban League symbol. I get more people asking me, Dan, what does that mean? And I said, it's an equality symbol. It's an equal sign. But for me, brothers and sisters, what the Urban League symbol really represents is two lines in the sand. And no administration, no one politician is bigger than what we stand for or what that you work for. And I'll be doggone if I'm going to let anybody cross those lines in the sand without a fight. And so I stand here to work with you at our Washington Bureau. You have a champion with Miss Nancy Flake Johnson and her team. But if I can ever be helpful to you or to any of you in the audience, I am here with you. And may God continue to bless each and every one of you. And thank you so much for your service. Thank you all for being here today as well.
Every member has an opportunity to each.
Okay,
I want to
okay.
make sure so Okay, just want to make sure all our members eat. And then once all the members have been served, and our special guests, which we happen to have, and I'd like to recognize as a matter of fact, we have Mr., the former governor of the province of the state of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He was the governor from 2013 to 2016, Sebastian Mpayo Tingo, and his lovely wife. Would you say? He is a world-renowned artist. Oh, world-renowned artist Steve Allen is also here. Yes. And one of his famous pieces is the painting of President Barack Obama, which is currently in the Smithsonian. He has been the official artist of the Olympics for the past 8 years. We're happy that all of you are here with us today. So any questions for Mr. Cravens before we move on with our program? Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you're recognized.
I just want to make sure. Where do you go? Where do you go?
I'm right here, sir.
But before you face question, Mr. Garvin, I want to come back forward and say, first of all, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Take him by the
First
side.
of all,
Take his
I want to say thank you for what you're doing on behalf of not Georgia, but this country. You're not just representing black people. I want you to know that. You're representing the least of us.
Yes.
Standing up for the disenfranchised.
That's right.
Standing up for justice and righteousness. So I just want to say
Thank you,
thank you.
brother. Thank you. Thank you.
And on behalf of the Black Caucus, we have a small medallion for you. This is our medallion of goodwill. It has our state seal on it, a flag and gold dome. I want to say keep on working, brother,
Thank you.
for the people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
On behalf of the Black Caucus, we will continue this fight in Georgia. We will introduce the resolution. We have Roger Bruce talking about inclusion. We have State Representative Al Williams talking about the lottery commission and talking about inclusion. We're talking about Georgia Power being inclusive. We're talking about all those things you just talked about, but we need help. But I'm going to open up for questions. I want to recognize State Representative Roger Bruce right now for a question.
You know, I appreciate what you're asking us to do with these resolutions, but from a practical standpoint, we both know you serve in the legislative community. The resolutions tonight, but they do carry zero authority or power with them. What can we do? You know, because what should we do? What could we do? How can we help you? How can you help us to really make this a fight? That at the end of this fight, there's a solution to all these issues that we're talking about, because the resolution by itself does not.
No, and I understand, Representative. What I would just say respectfully is, though, I think so many of our people are so uninformed that why I think a resolution is a good first step is a good educational tool. Is to just raise awareness that these are issues. I think you men and women on here, you get it, right? You are trying to pass legislation to do some of these things. But if we don't increase awareness, we gotta support you when you file this bill. You can't just be you the only person, and I don't mean the caucus, I'm talking about the community. The community has to support you. And so the reason why we thought a resolution was a good first step, I think sometimes we as elected, we know a resolution is not a bill. I get it. But to the general public, a resolution is still a legislative instrument. And so my advice would be, let's start with education. Let's make sure that our Urban League is supporting it, the other organizations support it. But you're fighting a good fight. I think you just have to continue to fight. Now, one thing, if you could do this would be great for black business. If you could get African Americans to spend the $1 trillion that we spend in our community with one another, that'd be great. But you can't pass even a bill that makes that happen, right? And so what I'm hoping is that as we continue to have these discussions and these dialogues, we have people like you who are fighting from the legislative standpoint. We've got people like Nancy Clay and our other partner organizations. We're talking about it from the economic standpoint. But some of it is we just got to be truthful with one another. That we spend $1 trillion in the African American community a year. And we very seldom spend it with one another. And so these issues about banks not lending, that's a true issue. The issues about discrimination, absolutely true. Nobody's stopping us from supporting one another.
Here's just real quick.
Yes, sir.
We have a bill that we've been pushing this for several years to try to get the state to look at all of the departments and determine where the discrepancies are in terms of how contracts are done. The bill sat in a committee
Right.
of a chairman who said that we should get over it.
Right.
We're not the only ones that have been discriminated against. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, I've been discriminated against. And I said, how so? He said, I'm bald. And that people discriminate against me because I'm bald. That was his answer as to why the bill is not moved. And needless to say, I took everything and not talk about the
Right.
But that's the kind of stuff we get.
Yes, sir. No, I get it.
The chair recognizes my cousin, Representative Jackson.
All right. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Cravens, first off, thank you for that overview. And I also appreciate your finale with those double lines, right? Because if Whitney Young Jr. was still alive, he would say, what? Did we make progress in the last 56 years? What do we need? We have the solutions. And I agree, you know, as Madam President Johnson, which she said as well. So we know what the solutions are. The question is, how do we mobilize the voting? Because until we do that, everything's going to remain the same. 56 years from now, we're going to still talk about education, housing, health care, justice reform, etc. But we got to mobilize that voting. We witnessed this in Alabama, right? As the black woman led that overturn of stopping a pedophile. Here we are, we're talking about the difference between a pedophile and a Democrat. And people were having problems with that. So how do we mobilize that voting piece to where folks get angry enough? Because it's one thing to be aware, but there are two things that motivate individuals to vote. They're either going to be angry, teed off, or they're in fear of losing something. Because if we print it in the AJC tomorrow that if you haven't voted in the last 8 years, you can no longer vote, you'll see a lot of mobilization, right? So how do we mobilize the communities to understand that the points that you raised, they are real, but we don't want to continue to kick this can for another 56 years because we want to be able to say to Whitney Young Jr. that what you discussed in 1962, we put those two lines in the sand.
Representative Jackson, if I can answer that question. We have been, in all of our communities all over America, we deal with that same issue, that if the African American vote would turn out at 60%, we would have statewide elected officials all over the Deep South of color, right? Just 67%, we would have, Louisiana's 30% African American, 25%, you have those similar numbers here. We could elect men and women of color that would be able to fight and get some of this legislation through. All I will offer is this. As a Generation Xer, who is between a vibrant group of baby boomers and a very vibrant group of millennials, and Generation Xers, we are not that, right? We go to work, we're raising our families, we're very quiet. What I am learning and what I am offering to the community is, I don't know that the messages we're using to communicate intergenerationally are working with people. A baby boomer votes because of their parents, they saw their parents and grandparents struggle. A millennial votes because maybe it's about a job or somebody got shot or they saw some injustice. And the people in between vote for various issues. What I think we should be doing a better job is rather than yelling at our young people, you better go vote because we died for that right, which for some that matters and some it doesn't. And rather than being critical, we need to come up with better messages. So we're having a policy conference in May at the National Urban League, and the whole conference is on voting. And I know everybody who comes to the conference votes already. What I'm trying to equip them with are with tools, almost like a focus group for politicians, what message works with the 60-year-old woman? What message works with the 30-year-old woman? What message works with the 18-year-old woman? And rather than us trying to make people vote because why we think they should vote, maybe we need to come up with better messaging. I'm hoping that works. I'm hoping that helps. We are actually having the brothers and sisters who ran, the sisters who ran the Alabama movement, Get Out movement, to be a panel for, because maybe they're doing something I don't know anything about. Right. So we're bringing them to come talk at our policy conference too. I don't have all the answers. I do know, though, I'm very disappointed that in my home state we have, in 2014, we had 800,000 African Americans registered to vote in Louisiana. So when a 20% turnout happens, what a wasted opportunity. The white folks voted at 25, we voted at 20. If we would have voted at 50, we could have elected whoever we wanted. That's right. Right, to support our issues. But we didn't go out either. And so it's a disappointment. I wish I could figure that out.
We're gonna now have shorter questions and short answers.
Yes, sir.
Representative Dukes, listen, I certainly appreciate the presentation that you provided us with. The thing is, though, is my question is, you all have identified the issues and the problems as you all see them. How do we get that message to be something that we put everybody on the same page? The message is the same, but right now, the African American community does not see where they are receiving actual deliverables from electing this many black folks in the state houses and federal houses. People will vote their interests, but there is a disconnect between how they vote their interests and how they participate. They don't see us doing that much for them, so they don't vote.
I think social media has given us a unique opportunity to maybe get our message out a little bit better. In the old days, when I was elected, if you didn't go to all of the meetings, or you didn't go to everybody's birthday party, or you didn't go to those, or have your town halls, the message maybe didn't get out. The local newspaper maybe didn't cover everything that you did. Now you have an opportunity with social media that you can really send out everything that you do. And so all I would encourage you to do is to continue doing that. I do think we are facing, I'm going to be short, Mr. Chairman, I think we're at a unique point in our history as people, because of technology, we're able to do things that no one would have ever thought we could have done. Because now it's not about cost to get our message out. So I think we have to be savvy. Even those of us who are a little bit older, we got to just accept it. Because we can use the tool to get some of that messaging out. Let people know what you did today. I took a bunch of pictures. My millennials and my staff say you better tweet it out. People are going to know where Don was today. I was here with the Georgia Black Caucus. We were talking about solutions. Yes, sir.
The chair recognizes State Representative Al Williams.
Thank you, sir, for coming. Thank you, this venerable organization you represent. I'm old enough to have remembered Whitney Young and many things he said, and a follower of his. But I want to follow up on Representative Roger Bruce's statement. You know, we've come to believe the resolutions die somewhere here under the gold dome and never really move forward. But I think that it's important. These resolutions are important, but they must be accompanied by statements from organizations like us and published in the media, both social media and the black news press. Because a resolution per se, I have found that the whereases and therefores, people stop at the second whereas. So a letter needs to tell them what the whereas and the therefores mean and put that in social media. Lastly, and I know we have got to talk about how far we have to go, but if Whitney Young were alive today, while he would still be working hard as he did then, he would have to acknowledge that when he made this statement, there were shotgun houses over every city in the north and south, outdoor privies all over city and country. Oh, thank God. I don't want you to think Whitney Young's work was in vain, because it ain't where it needs to be. Thank God it ain't where it was.
Mr. Chairman, I will not follow that.
The chair recognizes Karen Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the Urban League and Mr. Cravens and Ms. Johnson for coming and bringing us that wonderful presentation. I want to go back to what Representative Jackson said, and he left the chair in terms of getting out the vote, because we can have these wonderful resolutions, we can have these wonderful ideas, and like-minded people can come under the gold dome and vote our community's interest. But until we motivate people to get out and vote, and as Representative Jackson said, voters seem to be motivated either by anger or interest. And so the messaging, I think, is right on point. Either we've got to mobilize people by angering them, making people infuriated, or we've got to motivate them by interest. And so I appreciate your encouragement on getting out the message. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
The chair recognizes State Representative Mabel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation as well. But since we have an intergenerational group here today, I want to put this on the record. What is happening with the power of social media is so strong that nowadays I think that some of the millennials may think that the revolution is on social media, and it can be. But ultimately, at some point, somebody got to go to the street and meet somebody at a door.
Right, yes.
Because otherwise, all we talk about is we are messaging and we get into a group of people, but there's a whole group of people in our communities that would never be on social media, but they still need the services that we have. What I've noticed lately is that more young people are deciding that the way for them to make a contribution is immediately go from either college immediately to elected official. And I'm trying to figure out what in the world is going on. No preparation. No preparation. Right. Just they keep motivating Trump is crazy. Trump is crazy. And they say, I'm gonna run. And so what it is ridiculous because the bottom line is that it's a learning curve up in this game.
Right.
And that learning curve is you have to do something to touch a person, a family, something before you just decide I'm gonna be an elected official.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think that young people, some of the things that you want to do, if you would help us do it, work with us, and then we can, show you the ropes, so that way you can go to the next level. So I just wanted to say.
Representative Thomas, I met this young man in Washington, D.C. He came to me and says, I want to run for office someday. I want to do these things. And the advice I gave this young man was you need to go back to Atlanta, go back to Georgia, learn some of those things, make you some money, and then you run for public office. So and he's doing that. And you found it. That's right. And so that's good advice. The only other thing I'm telling my young people, because you made a great point, Representative, Julian Bond, when he was asked about Eyes on the Prize, he said, what did you not like about it? He said they showed our marches and our speeches and our protests, but he didn't show the hours we spent behind the scenes organizing and thinking and strategizing. And so I try to tell my young brothers and sisters, social media does give you that immediate gratification and amount, but if you're not thinking, as I say, you can be woke, but if you're so damn woke you're delirious, then you're missing the whole boat, right? Right? Because you can't be delirious. You got to get your rest sometimes and strategize. And so that's the advice I give to them, which I think is what you're saying. Yes, ma'am.
I'll do it.
Are there any other questions?
I appreciate you. Hold on.
Are there any other questions?
Come on.
Former Senator, thank you very much. We got one more.
Come on. Oh, keep up.
I just want to know, how do you monetize your resolution? Because those people need to see how do you monetize what they do. Because billboards all around don't represent young people. So unless you monetize it and then begin to develop a cadre or an academy for the monetization of the infrastructure, the resolution I think is fantastic. You've got to monetize the resolution, and you got to show how the billions of dollars that are going to be given to young people in the field of commerce. I grew up in real estate. I've been here 35 years, a graduate of Spelman College. My dad showed me what to do, but he never had a job. He was an entrepreneur. So unless you show young people the entrepreneurial spirit, which is the millennium, they have taught the whole world what technology means to getting people activated. And if you sent tonight 50 people a text message, I guarantee you 40 of them would answer you. If you send them an email, they might answer you in 3 days. So the post office is outdated. So unless we rise to the rise against the antiquated and move towards monetizing the infrastructure, we're still going to lose. So how is the Urban League going to monetize? Because just voting, I'm on the opposite side. I'm on the Republican side. And the thing about it is, you need both sides of the aisle.
I don't want to cut you off, but I do have to cut you off.
Okay, well, Roger, because you need both sides.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Do you have a card?
Okay, we have two more people that need to come up from the Urban League, so come on up now.
Am I done? Go get your minutes, young man.
Yes.
They
You have
can't
to come
sit up
quick.
there. They can talk
Brother
right
Son.
there.
Yes.
All
right
right,
there.
first I'd like to introduce to everyone Cinda Herndon let's see, I'm sorry, Cinda Herndon King. She is a PhD. She's the Executive Director of Career Rise, part of the urban I'm sorry. I'm just getting it all kooky. I'm a little, the United Way of Greater Atlanta. And here, I want to set Cinda up to share some very important with our legislators, because we need you to fight for workforce development jobs. We've done an
But you have to
economic.
be real quick, because
Okay.
before we have to go to.
Okay, all right, I'll make it
Melanie.
2 minutes.
Okay.
I have a summary outside if you want to see this. What we have done is look at the economic impact of job training programs and really ask the question, are these a sound investment in getting people more economic mobility? The answer to that is yes. We did a study including the Urban League and 5 other nonprofits, 9 training programs. The results are, first of all, these programs are effective. The graduation, placement, and retention rates are very high, among some of the best in the country. So there are people who know how to do this work. Secondly, job training stimulates economic growth. The new wages at 6 months for these 800 people who went through training the new wages was over $12 million a year that come from that. There was a 68% reduction in SNAP and TANF benefits. Thirdly, job training is a sound investment. This training resulted in $2.3 million annual benefit to the community from this training. That turns out, if you look at the new wages these people earn, these new wages over that minimum wage, it's 103% return on investment for 1 year of this job training. So our recommendations are we need to find more sustainable and regular sources of funding for this training. Philanthropy alone cannot sustain it. We need better access to data, UI wage data from the Department of Labor, so we can use data to improve our programs. We need to support connections to additional career pathways and incorporate more evidence-based practices for remediating those barriers such as criminal history and other things that can keep people from moving ahead. So with that, thank you very much. We'd love to work with you all on figuring out a better way to move these programs forward because they're great.
Thank you. Thank you all for
Thank
that. All right. Come on, Alex, come forward. Alex is with the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute that I know you all are very familiar with. Alex has some really good information to share.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll make this very brief. So I'm with the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. I'm a senior analyst there. And just this year, in January actually, we rolled out an ambitious and powerful vision called People Powered Prosperity. What People Powered Prosperity is, it's a set of goals that the state can subscribe to in order to advance economic mobility and economic opportunity for all of Georgia's residents. But I want to speak specifically really quickly to something that Don pointed out, which is around employment. If we were to make really ambitious investments in closing the employment gaps amongst Black and Latino Georgians in this state, we can bring in an additional $12 billion year over year in our state just by closing the racial gaps. And just to kind of, not to belabor Don's point, but the Black unemployment rate persistently is double or triple that of those of our white counterparts in the state. So another ambitious, I guess, ask that we've had and that we include in our People Powered Prosperity campaign is to consider how are we using, existing tools, financial tools that can help give other families in the state a cushion to move up the economic ladder. So we talk about things like enacting a state earned income tax credit, the Georgia Work Credit, and I have to thank the National Urban League and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta for also championing the earned income tax credit, what we call in Georgia the Georgia Work Credit, which 1.1 million families in the state of Georgia can stand to gain from. That gives many Georgians up to $630 a year that they can put away for savings, that they can use as a cushion to pay for health emergencies and things of that nature. Yeah. And the momentum behind the Georgia Work Credit is huge right now. We didn't get it into legislation this year, but the momentum is enough for us to continue championing those efforts. And once again, I thank the Urban League so much for being behind that and for all of y'all's work in helping move that forward. So I'll just wrap it up there.
Thank you,
People
Alex.
Powered Prosperity campaign. I have one-pagers. I will hand them out to you all in just a moment. Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least.
Wait, because you got these questions for people who have
Oh,
already
we
spoken.
do? Okay.
You spoke to you spoke to, closing the employment gap.
Yes.
How do you propose to do that?
Yeah, so I'm so glad Urban League is here and we have Career Rise here. What we have not utilized enough are proven strategies around sector-based employment.
Yes.
We have to invest in closing the gap amongst middle skill jobs. So we know that the need for jobs among like nursing assistants, electricians, jobs that don't require a bachelor's but do require more than a high school diploma, that need is growing. So we need to be able to retool things like HOPE, extend the time limit for HOPE to low income and make it need-based. So low-income adults can go back to school, retrain, and be able to access those jobs. We need to invest in proven programs that, funnel workers into IT, into construction, things like that, and get them trained in as little as 4 to 6 weeks so they can turn around and start earning a check. Those are just some of the things that we need to start doing.
That is the critical, and I just want to add, all of our technical college systems in Georgia throughout the state offer these 4 to 6 to 6 month, less than 2-year programs. We can take people from poverty to the middle class in less than 2 years by simply focusing on the high demand
Just one
sector.
quick reason. What I would like for you to do is to consider this, and that is the $1 trillion that African Americans spend, that they're in control of, that we only spend 2% of it in our own community. See, the conversation got to change. You see, we got to spend the money within our own community. That does not require a proclamation, legislation, or proposal. That's us changing how we view each other. Over 80% of the people that an African American business owner hire are other African Americans. You can train them, but they still not being hired.
That's why I'm so appreciative of work that the legislature is doing. Barriers to business ownership. So.
Got another question.
Hey, how are you? Alex, State Representative Dorian Clark from the 97th. Best district in the state. So I was actually reading an article yesterday, and I didn't know exactly. I didn't remember you guys were here.
Hell no. I'm not working for it.
But basically, it was talking about the wealth gap between whites, blacks, and
I don't know, but I ain't moving.
Latinos. And the wealth gap in black community is lower than it was pre-recession. Well, one of the things that this article was saying was, it tied back to employment. And I don't know if there's a computer that's doing this or some way that blacks are being ignored in the job market because of their name. So I don't know how we can address that, but there's somehow that they're not even getting the interviews. It's like it's getting someone is visually identifying that these are black candidates and they're being ignored, or there's a system, or a computer system, because we know again that a lot of these jobs, the computers are looking for keywords. So I don't know if you guys have done some study around that or how we can even address that issue, because we're not going to change our names. But if we can't, we've done the training. So a couple of ladies, they, master's degrees, advanced degrees, they've done it, they have the experience, but they're not getting the interviews and they're not getting the jobs. And if you can't get employed, you can't bring up the wealth and we can't address some of those things. But I love what my representative said, we got to figure out how to spend in the community, but we got to give them some money to spend first. So I didn't know if you guys have done anything around that or...
So, Georgia Budget and Policy hasn't looked specifically at the name measure, but I know exactly what study you're talking about. It's that folks with ethnic sounding names weren't getting callbacks for jobs or even for interviews. We're not going to ignore that employment discrimination exists. It certainly does, particularly on the basis of race and gender and age. That's a whole different list, I think, so that we're not going to deal with that right now. But through things like implicit bias training and stuff like that, it's about who is in leadership and who is in management.
Well, and I want to say that the young lady that was identified in a particular article that I was looking at wasn't necessarily an ethnic sounding name. You can take a Doreen, and her name could be Carter, Robinson, or Williams. And they decide that they think Carter is one race and Williams is a different one. But I'm just saying, I don't know. And this is stretching. Maybe we could do something where employers are looking at resumes without names. And I know that once you do applications, they want you to put your race. It's there because it doesn't make sense that you have people with advanced degrees that can't find a job and they have the experience.
And I'd like to speak to that because we have that exact situation right now. We have a bank works program. We've got This is meant to be an entry-level training program for the financial institution. And like a third of the class are people who have at least a bachelor's, if not a bachelor's and a master's degree, because they can't access. So Urban League is working on that, and the way we do it, we line the employers up before the training begins. They're clear that these are minority candidates, and we get people placed. So we have to line and that's one of the things that happened with that study, is all those people were hired, and the majority of them were African American or other minorities. And we got one more person, I just want her to give them.
Real quick.
Yep, real quick.
Thank you. My name is Patrice Barlow, and I serve as the education advocate for the Greater Urban League Greater Atlanta. And I just want to share with you an opportunity. Through the leadership of the Leadership Conference Education Fund, we are tackling the issue of education equity. And we realize that all of the upward mobility that happens in our communities really does start with the foundation, a strong foundation of education. So we are launching a parent advocate training, and we're offering this statewide, essentially, to provide advocation for parents, stakeholders in schools. And the main reason is under Every Student Succeeds Act. And Every Student Succeeds Act is now at the local level, as we know, and local education agencies are making sure that they are embedding the mandatory, required consultation from parents in their local plans. And so we know that if we can galvanize the parents, inform them and mobilize them, we can really start to make significant impacts. And one of the biggest motivators to do this is that a lot of the title funds that have been previously allocated to public schools will be available in open block grant funds, which means other entities other than our public schools will have access to those funds. So it's important to immobilize the parents and the stakeholders around education so that we can really start supporting our schools. One last thing, we know that charterized districts are becoming very trendy in education, and we have to realize that we use these barriers, these challenges, for moments of opportunity. These are opportunities to be able to allocate funds directly to our communities and our schools, and for our parents to understand their ability to move the mark, whether it's in our communities, whether it's academic achievement, or even as it extends into sustainable employment into the workforce. So I encourage you to reach out to the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. We are very excited to be launching this, and this is under the leadership of the Education Fund. And so we're making sure that this is true equity and access to all of our communities.
So we can come to your districts and partner with you to deliver this advocate training to get parents involved.
And there is information in the front if you'd like additional information.
Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Before we wrap this thing up, I wanted to give our brethren from the Congo an opportunity, if you'd like to say anything. I know you're enjoying the food, but would you like to say something?
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hello.
My English is not so very good because in my country we used to speak French. But I'm going to try to speak something so that you know that Congolese people are able to speak English. So let me tell you that I'm very happy to be among you to discover that we have a great family here in Georgia, in Atlanta. So myself, it's the third time for me to come here. The first time I came here, I was a governor in Equateur province, and then I had the time to speak about my province in that time. So today, I'm so very happy to discover that there is people, we are together to think about how to make life so very easy. That's why I encourage you to keep on going in this way, because if we are together, we are going to make life so very easy. After this, I am one who came to find my brother Steve, because we are thinking about how to make knowing Congolese people in this country about what can we do together? Because in Congo, in America, many people don't know Congo. And Congolese people also want to know what is the opportunity in this country so that together we can see what the good way to work in the way of making so life very easy. Congolese is a country who is in the center of Africa. There is many opportunity in Congo. So I want you to discover this country because we can do many things together. People are also very poor, but God has given many things in Congo. So if you are together with me, maybe we can do something to help you brothers who are many in Congolese. If I see you, myself, I'm sure that the grandparents of yourself come from Africa. So if that is true, it means that you can't be happy here, and your friend, your brother, are suffering in Africa. Let's do something together. God bless you.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody from the Urban League, our brethren from across the water there. We appreciate you coming and visiting with us. And keep up the good work. Any of my colleagues, you got anything you want to say before we shut down?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Honorable Vice President. What I want to say is that this was a lot of information, and we're going to take some of the handouts, but I would like to request that maybe after the session, that we come back and do something with the Urban League, because the real deal is, the Urban League is a civil rights organization. And even though when we think about civil rights organization, we think about marching and that type of thing, but the niche of the Urban League has always been the financial part. And so the real deal is we need to partner more with the Urban League so that we really can change economic policy in our communities as well. So my request is that we come back and do something after the session so we can get more details and see systemically how we can help our neighborhoods through the Urban League.
Very great. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks for the lunch, Urban League. Thanks for the work that you guys do. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. Meeting adjourned.